Libya's coastline was meant to be Africa's largest gateway to Europe, 1,770 kilometres of prime Mediterranean real estate, sitting at a strategic location between continents. It's a nation containing massive oil reserves, which could have acted as a springboard to development. But today, even the tiny island, Malta, handles 10 times more cargo than this vast African nation. This grand underperformance may seem easy to answer: political instability and poor governance, but the truth runs much deeper. So, why does Libya's coast that once fed empires falter in the modern era? And what does this reveal about how geographic advantages can be systematically destroyed? In 150 AD, the marble docks on Libya's coast bustled with grain ships loading cargo bound for Rome and other major cities in the empire. The engineering was extraordinary: artificial harbours carved from solid rock, flood control systems that would impress modern engineers, warehouses the size of aircraft hangars. The Romans understood the value of Libya was more than just its prime sea access. They utilized the fertile agricultural heartlands inland, building advanced irrigation systems, and managed the land intelligently to cultivate enormous amounts of crops for export. This has largely been lost today, with climate change, poor governance, and conflict, forcing Libya to now import a large proportion of its grain. The crown jewel during the Roman era was Leptis Magna. A man born here, Septimius Severus, became emperor of the entire Roman world. As emperor, he poured unimaginable wealth into his hometown. Leptis Magna was also a major export hub, serving trade routes with sub-Saharan Africa, which brought gold, ivory, exotic animals, and slaves to the shores of the Mediterranean. This golden age didn't completely end with the Roman Empire. Those who ruled in centuries after would prove that this coast could thrive under radically different systems. So, what came next, and why does today's Libya struggle? During the early Islamic period, Libya didn't just survive political transition, it continued to thrive in trade too. The coast continued to play an important role under the Islamic Caliphate, but there was a shift in focus, with trade routes within Africa strengthened. This brought scenes of large camel caravans transporting goods between the Islamic Mediterranean and sub-Saharan Africa. The Hafsid dynasty in the 13th to 16th centuries took this further, revitalizing regional trade and cultural life, while promoting scholarship and commerce with European city-states. The pattern was clear: successful rulers recognized the coast's inherent value and adapted their systems to maximize it. The geography remained constant. The strategic location between Europe and Africa was unchanged. Yet, this proven formula for prosperity was about to be abandoned through a series of choices that would systematically destroy everything previous civilizations had built. The first step in this destruction reveals how neglect can be just as devastating as active hostility. The first step was abandonment disguised as governance. After the Islamic age of prosperity faded, the great coastal cities entered prolonged decay under Ottoman rule. Cities like Tripoli became administrative outposts or notorious pirate havens who terrorized Mediterranean shipping. The Ottomans ruled loosely, with zero interest in large infrastructure projects. The once grand cities of Libya, the jewels of Roman North Africa, were now falling into serious decline. This wasn't active destruction, it was neglect, which allowed centuries of pioneering infrastructure and commercial expertise to rot away. But negligence, as devastating as it was, would prove to be mere preparation for the trauma that followed. In 1911, Italy invaded Libya with brutal efficiency, building impressive infrastructure projects largely for their own interests, rather than for the good of the Libyan people. Italy paved around 4,000 kilometers of roads and laid 400 kilometers of railways. It included the Via Balbia, a grand coastal highway connecting western and eastern provinces. It also expanded the ports in Tripoli and Benghazi with modern equipment. But none of this development truly served Libyans. The roads moved Italian troops to crush resistance. The ports facilitated settlement of tens of thousands of Italian colonists who seized the best farmland. The infrastructure created what Mussolini called Italy's fourth shore, turning Libya into an extension of the motherland through classic extraction economics. When the Italians were expelled during World War II, their hollow system collapsed, leaving behind crumbling infrastructure, destroyed buildings, and a deep psychological trauma. For many, shaking the shackles of colonial rule seemed to be the dawn of a new age. But what came next would be a continuation of the exploitation of Libya's people and resources. Enter Muammar Gaddafi in 1969, who took control following a military coup, and who reshaped Libya under his own vision. Vast oil reserves had been discovered in 1959, and it had transformed Libya from desperately poor to incredibly rich in just a decade. The focus of the country's economy shifted from the multi-product model, which had proved so valuable along the coast since the Roman era, to an oil-driven economy. This reliance on oil brought the demise of other industries, and it destroyed the country's maritime potential, which is still felt to this day. The distribution of wealth was also minimized under Gaddafi, who nationalized the oil industry and other key sectors, increasingly benefiting a few at the top. Ports, tourism, shipping, trade, all the activities that make coasts valuable require dynamic private sectors that Gaddafi's socialism systematically eliminated. In 1978, Gaddafi introduced Law No. 4, which nationalized all private companies and enterprises and effectively banned private ownership. This had a wide-reaching impact on many sectors. With a long Mediterranean coastline, one would think tourism would have become a big success story for Libya, but Law No. 4 was the nail in the coffin. Tourism, it's often reliant on private investment. Nationalism meant there was decades of inaction in the industry, compounded by a political image which dissuaded the few who may have visited Libya. Yet even Gaddafi's ideological assault on the coast would be amplified by external forces that would complete Libya's isolation from the global economy it had once dominated. In 1988, a bomb exploded on an airplane over Lockerbie in Scotland, killing 259 people on board, along with 11 residents in the town. At the time, the Libyan government was linked with the tragedy, and in 2001, a Libyan intelligence officer was convicted for his involvement in the attack. Libya faced extensive UN and US sanctions as a result, starting in 1992. These measures, they didn't just halt trade, they completed Libya's transformation from Mediterranean powerhouse to isolated pariah state. The World Bank estimated the sanctions cost Libya $18 billion in lost revenue. Libya claimed the damages were significantly higher. For more than a decade, these sanctions cut Libyan ports from global networks entirely. When they were finally lifted, Libya had fallen generations behind its neighbors in maritime development, while the world economy had moved on without them. By 2011, 4 decades of this systematic hollowing out had erased not just infrastructure, but the entrepreneurial culture needed for diverse economic development. Gaddafi's brutal downfall and the subsequent power vacuum led to total civilizational collapse. The Arab Spring reached Libya in 2011, with Libyans rising up to end Gaddafi's authoritarian rule through a brutal civil war, supercharged by NATO bombing. But what followed wasn't liberation, it was the complete shattering of any remaining elements of a functioning state. Power fragmented among countless militias or tribal loyalties. The coastline, with its cities, ports, and oil terminals, immediately became the primary prizes in the conflict. Libya split between rival governments in Tripoli and Benghazi. Political paralysis and the simmering undertone of violence meant no national budget, no reconstruction plans, and no ability to perform basic infrastructure maintenance on a coast that desperately needed investment. Since oil money flows through coastal terminals, controlling these facilities became essential for any faction. This made the coastline both the permanent center of conflict and its primary victim. The Libyan coast, which once thrived in Mediterranean trade, became a battlefield where even basic port operations were incredibly challenging. The bloodshed, instability, and poverty forced many Libyans to take drastic measures to find safety, fleeing the country by sea, across the Mediterranean, and to Europe. This extensive outward migration converted Libya's coast from a center of commerce into a departure point for human desperation. The nation became a magnet for organized crime, including many of the militias who trafficked Libyans and many other desperate people from other parts of Africa to Europe. The total number runs into the millions, with the central Mediterranean route via Libya becoming the world's deadliest migration corridor. Tens of thousands of people have lost their lives making the crossing. This human tragedy, it doesn't only exist on the sea. Many of those making their way to Libya reported facing exploitation throughout their journey, including forced labor, rape, robbery, and torture, something which still exists today in the region. These migration flows transformed the Libyan coastline into a stage for European border politics and created an extensive humanitarian crisis. To compound Libya's problems further, September 2023 brought Storm Daniel, which slammed into the east of the country. 2 dams above the town of Derna gave way, pieces of infrastructure which had been neglected for decades. Repeated warnings about dangerous conditions were ignored by fractured, competing authorities who couldn't coordinate basic infrastructure maintenance. The catastrophic flood wiped out 1/4 of the city. Thousands died. The storm was just the trigger. The cause was systematic state failure. The complete picture emerges in the statistics. Egypt processes more than 7 million shipping containers through its ports annually. Libya manages less than 300,000. Before the recent conflict with Israel, Lebanon was handling nearly 2.5 times the amount of port trade Libya was. To put that into perspective, Lebanon has a 225-kilometre coastline, close to 8 times smaller than Libya. The contrast with its neighbours is devastating. Egypt just signed a $35 billion deal with the UAE to develop Ras Al Hekma, a massive Mediterranean resort and business district that represents the largest foreign investment in Egypt's history. Meanwhile, Tunisia has transformed its 1,148 kilometers of coastline into a thriving tourism economy, with resort towns like Hammamet, Sousse, and Port El Kantawi drawing millions of visitors annually. Its neighbors are seeing economic progress, particularly along their coasts, while Libya has taken backward steps over recent decades. So, what did Libya do instead of leveraging the coast that Romans and rulers after had shown can flourish? They chose abandonment over adaptation, systematically, generationally. Ottoman rulers let thriving ports decay into pirate havens. Italian colonizers exploited the nation for their own needs. Gaddafi lined the pockets of a select few with oil wealth while ignoring large parts of the country and its private sector. Competing factions turned strategic ports into battlegrounds during the Civil War. Each era faced the same choice: embrace the coast's proven potential or squander it for short-term political gain. Each era led to the destruction of the coast's potential. Libya's collapse reveals how geographic advantages mean nothing without political will to harness them. Egypt modernized Alexandria and built the Suez Canal infrastructure. Turkey developed its Mediterranean coast into tourism and shipping hubs. Tunisia maintained functional coastal economies despite being smaller and having only a tiny fraction of Libya's oil deposits. Libya possessed the potential and had geography on its side, with the longest Mediterranean coastline in Africa, massive oil reserves, and a strategic location between Africa and Europe. Yet, many eras chose extraction, ideology, or conflict over sustainable development. Libya's coast isn't underdeveloped because of its geography. It's underdeveloped because its fate has been repeatedly mismanaged. Ruling powers and colonizers have exploited the Libyan people to the detriment of development. Today, foreign powers including Turkey, Russia, and China vie for influence over Libya's coast, with the lucrative oil industry at the center of business. Meanwhile, the political and security situation within Libya remains dangerously fragile. The pattern continues: outside powers reaping value while locals suffer the consequences. Libya's story matters because it shows how immense potential can be systematically destroyed through human choices and how geographic advantages can be squandered.